All right, so you just read or listened to the poem Oranges, and you should have already actually went through this page that we're going to review. So we took some time to analyze this poem. We analyzed a poem yesterday, so analyze just means kind of to break down, to understand it better, to look at the pieces and parts a little bit. We watched that video that talked about like the ingredients of a poem, right? We're almost breaking this into ingredients, individual pieces of that poetry puzzle, if you will. So remember, we talked about, though, that poetry is subjective, meaning that each person kind of takes different meaning from it or could maybe see something a little bit different. So just because I have this down on my page does not necessarily mean that you have the exact same thing, and that's okay if yours is a little bit different. There should definitely be some similarities to what you and I have both taken from this poem, but if it's a little bit different, that's okay, because that's kind of the cool thing about poetry, but it's also something that can be kind of difficult when we are trying to analyze it. So let's look at this first part. So the poem stats. Obviously, the title is Oranges. The style is free verse, and what that means is that it's written almost more like a story. There's not as much rhyme and rhythm to a free verse poem as poetry that we're probably used to. It's not quite like a song or like song lyrics. That's kind of what I like my go-to for poetry, to have a point of reference. But free verse feels a little bit more like a regular story. Obviously, it's not formatted that way. If you look back at the poem looks quite a bit different, right? The way that it's written, but that's what's called free verse. Okay, let me go back to there. There we go. Words and phrases that repeat. There are some things they talk about: walking over and over again, a smile on a face. Definitely oranges are something, a word or a phrase that repeats quite often. They talk about the money sum. Definitely should have orange in there somewhere. Probably something about walking. Those are two things that definitely get repeated quite a bit. And then the opening and closing line, that's easy enough. Just the first time I ever walked with a girl, I was 12, is the opening. And someone might have thought that I was making fire with my hands is the closing. That's the last thing that was said. That's kind of like almost like the quotation marks of the story. It's the beginning and the end of the story, right? So we're going to look back at this again. So we're going to develop some understanding here, meaning we're going to really start breaking those pieces and parts down. So we're going to start with images. So images are things that you can almost, it's kind of like using imagery, right? Imagery. So something that you can picture in your mind. So I definitely could picture the porch light when he described the porch light. The bright of the orange, I could definitely, I could imagine. And here we talked about like her bright face, her face covered with rouge, right? Her rouge just means like rosy cheeks. Newly planted trees. You could talk about the drugstore. For me, I didn't put this in here, but another thing is he's talking about like seeing his breath because it's cold, right? We've all been there when it's cold outside and you walk outside and you can see, your breath in front of you. So those are things. You may have found some other things, or other things may have popped out in this poem that you could imagine or that you could kind of see in your mind. Places that they talked about. They talk about her street and her house, the used car lot, the drugstore, walking to and from the home, right? Those are pretty well the same. I would imagine you probably have some of those same things, maybe not as many, but definitely the drugstore, the used car lot, her street, and her house would be places that they would have described well. Objects. Obviously, the oranges, right? That's the name of the poem. They refer to the oranges several times, so probably the oranges. Maybe the dog barking, the house, the gloves that she has, the candy and the chocolate that they see, the nickel in his pocket. Lots of objects that were brought up here, but you should definitely have something about the oranges in there. And then the other things, maybe some stuck out to you more than others. I would imagine a lot of us put something about the candy or the chocolate that tends to stick out to us. And then finally, sounds that we can hear. Definitely the dog barking, right? The dog barking stands out to me. Maybe the bell as they walk in. I'm not sure if you've ever been into a store where when you open the door, the bell dings. I feel like that's happening less and less often. But maybe you've walked into some place and there's like bells on the door, or, it makes a sound. Maybe you even does that in your own home. Maybe you have an alarm system and you walk in. That's kind of what I imagine. And then the cars hissing past. That actually reminds me a little bit of Home of the Brave, how Keck would describe it. But those might be the sounds that you would hear. Now we're flipping over to the back, or we're scrolling down to the next part. And we're actually taking we're breaking this poem down into pieces, right? Actually looking at the different sections that he's talking about and seeing if we can understand some meaning from what is actually happening here. So let's read this first one. It says, "The first time I walked with a girl, I was 12, cold and weighted down with 2 oranges in my jacket." So what's really going on here is he's talking about the first time that he's going on kind of like a little date, right? It's a younger boy. He's 12, and he's kind of nervous about going and being with this girl by himself. The oranges are weighing him down. I'm not sure if you caught this or not because he doesn't have any money. We find that out later that he kind of almost uses oranges as currency or in exchange for money, but he doesn't know really probably what he's going to do. He's probably feeling like he needs to do something special, right, for this girl that he obviously likes, and he takes these oranges with him because he doesn't have the money that he needs. The next section, light in her eyes, a smile, starting at the corners of her mouth. I fingered a nickel in my pocket, and when she lifted a chocolate that cost a dime, I didn't say anything. So he's excited about seeing the girl, her eyes lighting up, the smile coming across her face when she sees all of the candy. So the girl is obviously excited about the candy, and he's probably a little bit nervous. We know all he's got is just the nickel and the oranges, right? So he's still trying to play it cool. He's not wanting to seem like he doesn't have enough money to be able to afford it. Then he talks about, he sets the nickel up on the counter and then he puts the orange on the counter. And he says, I set them quietly on the counter, and when I looked up, the lady's eyes met mine and held them, knowing very well what it was all about. I like this part of the poem a lot. I feel like this is when the woman understands the situation. That, this little boy is trying to impress this girl, and he obviously doesn't have enough money to buy her something special. And so she understands that the orange is meant to be, payment, the other 5 cents that he's missing. And I think that's kind of a sweet moment that she's like, I understand, I won't say anything. We'll be able to take this and we'll move on. So, and then the last one, I peeled my orange that was so bright against the gray of December. So I think he's kind of comparing here. So the orange is nice and bright. The orange is kind of what saved him, right? He was able to buy his girl something nice. And so this is a moment where he's just feeling happy and bright and hopeful and good. The orange is kind of representing his emotions, that bright feeling. So overall, I think this poem, Oranges, is about young love. It's about, a boy that's trying to impress a girl. That orange is kind of like a symbol of hope a little bit. That bright color orange is almost his symbol of hope. Now, you may have had something different on these. I would imagine we have some things that are definitely pretty similar. We should have some things that are pretty similar, but you may have worded them a little bit different, and that's okay. And what the poem is about, maybe you had a little bit different of an interpretation on it, and that's okay too, as long as you can back it up. And really, these boxes here are almost like our text evidence. So if you can't take these 4 boxes and prove what you think the poem is about, then we probably are off somewhere. But if yours is a little bit different than mine, that's okay too. So today was our last day of practice. Tomorrow you guys are going to be doing a poem analysis on your own, so you won't have this video to go back through. So if you need to look back at this and just kind of go back over the information, if you needed to change anything, you could change anything. You are going to submit this today, so make sure that you get this submitted in Canvas, and I think that is it.